Hello everyone and welcome to another Skynamic tutorial. This is our fourth tutorial out of our 8-part tutorial series that's introducing everybody to Adobe Flash. Specifically today we're going to be going over an introduction to Flash animation. Today is August 27th, 2017 and it is 8 p.m. Eastern. How's everyone doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah, we're good.
Good.
Hey! Excellent! All right. So specifically, what are we going to be going over today? Well, we're going to be talking about this giant area down here, which is known as the timeline, and talk about frames versus keyframes and how to use the timeline, and putting in keyframes and all this other shenanigans. We're going to talk about onion skinning and edit multiple frames, which are these two buttons down here, and how you can utilize them effectively. We'll then talk about the three tweens, the classic tween, the motion tween, and the shape tween, and when you shouldn't use them, and when you should use them. Then we'll have a brief animation demo where I'm going to animate the smiley demo right in front of you guys, which basically goes over the 4 different ways of animating symbols inside of Adobe Flash. And then we'll end off the lecture by talking about working with sound inside of this program and just some of the pitfalls you want to be able to avoid with regards to sound. Otherwise, though, this tutorial is meant to be pretty loosey-goosey, just like all of our other ones, so if you have any questions, or you want me to go over something that maybe I'm not touching on, or you want me to repeat myself, just speak up and let me know. But without further ado, let's talk a little bit about frames versus keyframes, and traditional versus Flash terminology, because this could be a little confusing for those of you who have traditionally animated or have been taught how to traditionally animate before. So usually with just animation in general, the language of animation is we start off with our keyframes, which in general walk cycle are the contact poses. And we call them the contact poses because that's when both feet are contacting the ground. And those are just one example of keyframes or key poses. And you'll often hear that whenever we're critiquing animation inside of our crew meetings. We're like, oh, you got to fix this key pose, or oh, let's change the timing on that keyframe right there, and that's usually what we're talking about when we say key pose and keyframe in traditional animation. Then what we then do is after we've done those keyframes, we then knock out breakdown poses, which in a walk cycle are the passing poses, which is when one leg is passing the other leg. And a breakdown is just a way of further defining the motion of a figure or a shape or an animation. Now we're going to talk a lot more about breakdowns and in-betweening and all that stuff when we get to our puppet animation tutorial here in, let's see, part 7. But I just want to show you guys the terminology for all of this. So after you've got your keyframes and your breakdowns, you then do your in-betweens, which are all the in-between drawings between your keyframes and breakdowns to basically smooth everything out and flesh it all out and make it look animated and delicious. So this is a traditional terminology, keyframes, breakdowns, and in-betweens. But for Flash, basically the Flash terminology for all of this is keyframe. Keyframe, 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 keyframe. Everything is called a keyframe inside of Flash. And for you traditional animators, that can get a little confusing at first, because there's a lot of times when we're just saying, hey, tweak that keyframe, change that keyframe, hey, can you move that keyframe over here, insert a blank keyframe. And you might be thinking, what? You're not supposed to have that many keys in an animation. What are you talking about? Well, we're just talking about the keyframes themselves, which are these little circular things down here. That's just what Flash calls changing something to make it animated, which we'll get into here in the next slide. So I just want you guys to know that there is a difference between that terminology. So for most of these tutorials, not to mention all the crew meetings that we have, I'm constantly switching back and forth between calling something a keyframe as an actual keyframe, or calling something a keyframe because it's just a keyframe in Flash. One way that I like to differentiate is I'll call these key poses, and then I'll call all this stuff keyframe. And that's just one way that you can get around that problem. So let's look at the timeline a little bit better. So this is our Flash timeline, and it's divided into frames, all the way from 1 to God knows however many you want to go to. Whenever you see a circle, that is a keyframe. If it's a filled in black circle, it means that there is artwork on that keyframe. For example, this is a black keyframe down here, and this has all of this artwork on it. However, this is a blank keyframe right here because it's white with a circle. I select this, and it doesn't select anything on here. There's nothing on that frame. So circles are keyframes. If you see a rectangle, that's called an end frame, and that just denotes where your current keyframe is ending before it starts with another frame. It's pretty pointless. You don't really need to even pay attention to the fact that there are little rectangles. Completely ignore them. They serve no purpose at all. Just ignore the crap out of them. They're, man, if there was an extension that I could install that would remove them from the program, I would totally do it. Then all this blank space that's in between all of these, that is just your general frame. So for example, I've got a keyframe right here, which is our stage mask. So this black circle right here is that stage mask. And all of the space in between is basically just that mask being held for all of these frames. Likewise, text, here's all of my text right here. If I change the stage color to something else, every single one of these circles is a completely different text thing. So every single time that you have a circle, or aka a keyframe, that is your way of changing something. And whenever you're changing something, there's potential for animation. Any questions about any of the terminology or what these frames and keyframes look like down here on the timeline?
It's pretty clear, yeah.
All right, excellent. Awesome. And keep in mind that whenever I ask you guys a question, and you know, I want to hear you say either no or yes, just so I know that you actually heard my question. But yeah. Let's talk about using the timeline. So shortcuts. Shortcuts are amazing with any software that you use, especially with Adobe. They're especially important with animation inside of Adobe Flash, because these keyframes just are going to make you work 10 times faster. So this right here is a symbol, and if I jump inside of this symbol, I've got a whole brand new timeline because I'm inside of this symbol, work area 09. And let's go ahead and let's create some stuff here. So I'm gonna go ahead and extend my my frames out to frame 24. So what I can do is I can just select it, right click, and go insert frame. And basically it just extends all of this out to frame 24. Likewise, what I could have done as well is I could have just selected these and hit F5 and insert one frame at a time by hitting F5 on my keyboard. If I want to get rid of everything, I can select it and then I can hit Shift F5 to remove the frames, just like that. Or, if I have it selected, I can right-click it and go to Remove Frames. And it does the exact same thing. I can also come all the way out to here like I did earlier and just hit F5 and it'll automatically extend the frames out to this. F5 is your insert frame. Shift F5 is your remove frame. Now let's go ahead and let's put a circle. Let's capitalize that. And let's put a circle down. Voila. Let's not make it have an alpha of 0. There we go. So I've got a circle, and notice how the moment I put that circle on this layer, it was filled with a black circle and then grayed out. I can delete that right now, and it goes back to a white circle, and it's all whited out. So that's just another visual example of how when you've got artwork on a layer, it's going to fill it in with black and gray it out. Let's say I want to move this circle around and actually animate it. That's the kind of thing where all I have to do is just put down a keyframe. And I can do that by just right-clicking and going Insert Keyframe. And I'll just move it. Then I'll come over here and I can do that again, right-click and Insert Keyframe, or I can hit F6. And then move it again. And there we go. Look at that. I'm animating. Woo! It's as easy as that. It's basically inserting these keyframes, which allow you to basically create a whole new image on this actual keyframe itself, and Flash will remember that and create animation out of it. Let's say I want to get rid of one of these keyframes. Well, I can select it, right-click, and go to Clear Keyframe. Likewise, I can select it again, and I can hit Shift F6, and that'll clear the keyframe as well. Now, if I want to play my animation, so if I go F6, and I have it kind of go back a bit, and I go F6, and I have it start going up, and then I go F6, and now it's going up even faster. I go F6 again, and now it's going over there, and I go F6 again, and now it's coming over here. And it's coming down there, and then it comes down here, and then it starts to slow in, and then it slows in even further. And if I want to see what that looks like, I just have to hit play or enter, and it'll play it for me. I can also click on this button right down here, which says play, and that does the exact same thing. I can also set this to repeat, because you'll notice that when it reaches the end, it stops playing. I have to keep on hitting enter if I want it to play again and again. Now you can click on this button right here, which says loop, and just set this to cover your entire area that you want to loop, and then hit play, and it'll just automatically loop it over and over and over again. Let's say I only want to loop this top part right here. Okay, well, I'll just make it so that it's only showing that top part. And there it goes. Now it's just playing the top part and looping that. If I want to turn looping off, bam, just click on that and it goes away. Any questions about using the timeline, putting in frames, removing frames, etc., etc.?
No.
Nope.
We're clear.
Nope.
Sweet. All right, let's keep going then. So let's talk about onion skinning. Now, onion skinning is a specific button, and it's actually located right here. And this allows you to look at multiple frames at the same time, which is kind of like a virtual light table. So for example, I've got a symbol here. If I jump inside, it's already got animation. If I hit that play button, it's just this guy, he's just walking. He's gonna go get himself some Wendy's. He's happy. But let's say I want to look at multiple frames at once, because right now it only allows me to look at one frame at any given point in time. Well, if I click on this onion skinning option, see how suddenly it kind of ghosts the frame before it and the frame after it? Let's say I want to see like the 3 frames after it. Well, you just got to drag this out. Oh, sorry. Drag that out to show the 3 frames after it. There it goes. And let's say I want to see the 3 frames before it. There we go. What if I want to see all of them? And then come all the way to the end and go. And now, it's always showing all of them. And that's basically onion skinning. Onion skinning will just allow you to look at frames that you otherwise are not selecting, which can greatly help you with in-betweening and making sure that your animation is lining up with other frames of your animation. It allows you to work along arcs and etc., etc., etc. It's a very, very useful tool. And once again, that tool is called Onion Skins, and it is right down here, this little button. And that's how you turn it on and off. Likewise, there is another amazing tool called the Edit Multiple Frames tool, which even if you're not an animator, this is still an amazing tool to know. I think I used Flash for like a year and a half before someone randomly came up to me and was like, oh, why don't you use this tool? And I'm like, oh my god, I didn't even know that tool existed. Oh, that tool's so amazing. So let's take a look here. So we've got another symbol, and it looks like it doesn't have as many frames in it this time. It's an animation walk cycle without it actually cycling. Every single one of these drawings is different from the other, because there are 8 drawings that create this particular walk cycle, which means if I wanted him to continue walking, I would have to keep copying and pasting these 8 frames over and over and over and over again to get him to walk. Now, how can I go about doing that? I'm an animator. I want to try and get this, copied over there. All right, well, let's create a keyframe here by hitting F7, which puts in a blank keyframe. And maybe I'll grab this and I'll hit Control-C on my keyboard and hit Control-Shift-V to paste it in place. Maybe I'll turn on my onion skinning, and I can kind of figure out that he goes like right about there. And then here we go, F7, F5, grab the second one, copy, Control-Shift-V, and now I'll kind of move it right over here. Kind of like that foot coming down right there. And I can just keep going about this, da 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 da. But man, that really kind of sucks. Like, it's going to take me forever to get all that done. So another way that I could go about this is I could try to copy all of these all at once and move them over here. Alright, well maybe I'll just select all this. Then I'll hit copy. And I'll come over here and then I'll hit paste. That didn't work. It only copied the one frame that I had selected at that point in time, which kind of sucks. What if I select all these frames and I go right click and I go copy frames? Maybe I can paste frames? Yeah, okay, so it pasted the frames. Oh, but it pasted them exactly in the same spot that they were in. It sucks. I guess I'd still have to move them over one by one, which is shitty. But this is where we can take advantage of that edit multiple frames option, which is actually, if you remember, Onion Skins is right here. Next to that is the Onion Skin Outlines mode, but right next to that is edit multiple frames. And if we click on that, okay, it's kind of doing the same thing that it did for onion skinning, but it's like it's actually showing all of them as fully fleshed out drawings, not as faded out drawings. But what this allows you to do is, as long as you have this little thing covering up the frames you want to edit, you can actually select any one of these frames. Because they're all editable, which means that I can actually hit Control A, which is select all, and I can move all of them all at once. Turn that back off again, and there, I was able to actually move all of those frames all at once, which is phenomenal. I can do the exact same thing again. I can grab these first 8, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all those. Now I can copy those frames again and paste those frames, but if you hold down Alt and just drag, it automatically copies them. So it saves us a lot of time. And let's just do the exact same thing again. So I'll turn on my my onion skinning. So that guy ended right there. Let's go to edit multiple frames. And I'm not going to hit Control A this time. I'm actually going to just select these ones right here. And then move these over and use that one as my guide. Turn that back off again. Turn the onion skinning back off again. And there we go. I'm able to continue that walk cycle, which has saved me a lot of time. It's saved a lot of money, and I get to keep my job. Hey, hey. So that's just one example of how the edit multiple frames option can really save you a lot of trouble. It just literally does exactly what it says. It lets you edit multiple frames all at once. Any questions about edit multiple frames?
Well, that's
Nope.
all.
Alright, sweet. So let's keep going. So let's get into the tweens. So the first tween we're going to start off with is the one... It's the tween that has basically defined Flash, which is the classic tween. It's classic. Usually whenever you go to newgrounds.com or you watch a really crappy Flash animation on the interwebs, and it's like, it doesn't look that good, it's mainly because it was animated using a classic tween. So let's dive into this symbol. So we go into a new work area, and we've got a timeline set to 3 seconds. That's a little too long. Let's make that just 1 second. So 1 second is 24 frames. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a circle. Let's make this neon green. There we are. And in order for a classic tween to work, you have to have an object on a layer, and that object has to be a symbol. So I'm going to select this, go to Modify, Convert to Symbol, and turn this into a symbol. I'll make it a graphic. And let's just call this neon green 1. Let's get rid of that underscore at the beginning. Neon green 1. Alright, now I've got a symbol. Now all I have to do is I have to set the ending keyframe. So I'm going to put another keyframe over here by hitting F6, and then I'll move it into the position I want it to be at. So I'm going from here to there, here to there. And now, as long as I've got my 2 keyframes, my beginning and my ending, I can right-click anywhere in between them, come all the way up here to the top and hit Create Classic Tween. Bam! And now my entire layer has actually turned blue, and there's a little arrow pointing from one end to the other. And that, Flash has actually animated that moving from my first keyframe to my end keyframe for me. It did all the animation for me. Now it looks like shit, But at least it animated it, right? So how can I make this look better? Well, we can do that by applying one of the 12 principles of animation, which is slow in, slow out. If I select this, notice how my properties window has changed to show me the properties of this frame. If I deselect it, it's showing me the document. If I select it again, it's showing me the properties of the frame. And because the frame has a classic tween on it, it's giving me the properties for tweening. And I can actually set my easing. Maybe I put this all the way to a -100, which means it'll start off slow and go fast. Or I can set this all the way to +100, which means it'll start off fast and go slow. Or I can set this back to 0 and actually come over here and click on this little pencil icon that says Edit Easing. And that'll bring up a custom ease in, ease out window that basically allows me to create my own custom ease. So maybe I'll have it slow out and then slow in. That's looking a lot more dynamic. That looks a lot more appealing. So that's pretty nice. Okay. So classic tweens allow you to have slow in, slow out. They allow you to move an object from one space to another. What else can it do? Well, let's try creating another tween, and I'll just copy this circle again onto this layer. Notice how I'm creating a whole new layer for this. I can't do a classic tween for two different objects on the same layer. Every single object has to be on its own layer in order for it to work. If I were to try to like paste that object on the same thing, so I've now got both of these objects on the same layer, right? Notice how suddenly my tween is turned into a dotted line? And it's no longer really working anymore. Even if I take this and I copy it and I come over to this and I paste it, so maybe I'm moving this one over here, it just doesn't work. Notice how it's only animating the first symbol that I copied and pasted, and it doesn't animate the other one. If I delete it, I come back over here and I delete it, there it goes. It suddenly goes back to a single straight solid line. So it has to be on its own layer. So I'll paste this and maybe I'll put it over here. And I'll come over here and go F6, and maybe I'm going to have it shrink down. So I've got my two frames. Let's right click and go classic tween. And there we go. So classic tweening also allows you to shrink things, and I'm going to give this the exact same kind of custom ease as well, just because it looks nice. There we go. So what else can you do? Let's create another layer here. Let's copy and paste that again. Put it on its own layer. And I'm going to jump inside of here real quick and tweak it so that one color is actually different. Oh, but it edited all the other ones. That's right, because they're all the same symbol. But that's okay, it doesn't matter. So now I'm going to come over here, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it. Let's do that. So go from there to there, there to there. Right click, classic tween. So classic tween also allows you to rotate. So you can move something, you can translate it, you can shrink something, you can transform it, and you can rotate something. And on all of these, you can give them custom ease in, ease out. It is incredibly rare that you'll ever have a tween that does not have an ease in and an ease out on it. Very rare. I would just always be in the habit of putting easing on your tweens. So we can also skew, and it'll do that as well. We can do multiple ones all at the same time. Maybe I'll rotate this and shrink it down, and it'll do all of it together. So, when are classic tweens applicable? When should you be using classic tweens? Well, for character animation, my recommendation is never. You should never use classic tweens on character animation. The only exception would be if your character is doing a very, very long-winded, subtle motion that's lasting for many, many frames. Then you could put a classic tween on there, but then I would convert it to twos after the fact, which is what we're going to be doing later on when we do the smiley demo. Otherwise, though, character animation that is tweened, looks like it's been tweened, and it does not look believable. It looks very puppeted, which is not a good thing. Whenever you see Flash animated characters online, and they kind of have this sort of smooth motion feeling to them, where they kind of feel like robots, that's because the character animator animated them using tweens, and it looks awful. We don't like that with our show. Our show is even though we're animating using puppets and puppet techniques, we try to achieve a traditional look and feel to our animation. And we do that by actually doing everything manually, by putting in all the keyframes and moving them ourselves and applying those 12 principles of animation.
If I could just say something.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
With tweens, well, because I learned this just kind of working early on Flash. With some studios, basically they follow the same principle. For subtle scenes, sometimes they will use a tween, but then edit the keyframes so it doesn't have that very uncanny, smooth feel to it. Like if it's just like a simple resting pose.
Yeah.
Because that helps save time. What we're doing here, though, let's try and avoid that as much as possible. Only because I've seen this in like really professionally done stuff too, where they had to use like tweens to help kind of like cut down on production. Is that if the arcs aren't accounted for, then the motion just looks way too smooth. Like nothing realistically moves like that.
Exactly.
And that's why it looks so robotic.
Exactly.
So.
Phil pretty much described it right on the nose there. I completely agree.
Like one of my favorite short films, Lucky Day Forever, is animated in Flash, and they use the guy used tweens when there was like a simple resting pose, like the character is just kind of like reclining in a chair, and maybe he shifts his body weight a little bit. Some scenes look good, but then there's like a few shots where it looks odd because it's not spaced out correctly, so the motion is too smooth, and it looks like their body is sliding.
Yeah.
It just looks weird, so
yeah,
be careful about that.
I completely agree. Like, basically, don't ever use tweens for characters, or if you do, like, let's say that these were characters right here and I used these tweens. What I would recommend doing after the fact is taking all of this, right-click, convert to keyframe, and basically it took all of those and turned all of them into keyframes. Then what you would do is you'd right-click and you'd remove the tween. And then what you would do is every other frame, Shift F6 to remove it. So basically you're putting it on twos. Because that's what most animation is. Most animation is done on twos. It's very rare that it's ever animated on ones. So if we put that all on twos, and hit that play button, see how it doesn't look as smooth, but that's what makes it feel more like it was actually animated traditionally. So if you are going to use a tween for a character movement, my recommendation would be after you're done using the tween, convert it to keyframes like this. Even then, though, it still is a very rare occasion when you ever have cause to use a classic tween on a character. So if that's the case, then, like, when are classic tweens good to use, right? Like, when should we be using classic tweens? Well, the best way to use them, the best way to utilize them is with camera moves, because we do all of our camera movements inside of Flash. So let's look at a couple examples for camera moves. Now, this might be one of those moments where you guys might want, like, you don't have to listen to the music for this, so if you want to listen to the music for it, you can click on that live stream link I posted down earlier. But for all of you watching this recording after the fact, you'll be able to hear this music because you've got my computer audio turned on. So here's a camera move example. Let's open this up. All right, let's watch that one more time. So based upon everything that we've learned so far, could any of you spot the tweens? Anybody? Let's open this up in CS6. Nobody? You're all silent. Why are you being all quiet?
It's too laggy. I cannot see that much.
Oh, really? Well, okay. Well, then, in that case, let's go through this. And let me turn off this music layer. So let's go through this and actually show you guys where tweens were used in here. So here's the very first one. So the opening shot. Now, this opening shot is nothing but tweens. So the actual tweening of going from this building, which is Montgomery Hall, which is the animation building for our college, SCAD, it has a tint of 100% black on it. And that's what this keyframe is set to. Then there's a tween going all the way down to this keyframe right here. And that is the same object, but the red, the green, and the blue have actually gone down. So it's gone to a bit more of a warmer tint. And then here it is again going to another keyframe where it's just the object normally by itself. So basically what we're doing is we're classic tweening the actual color change of the object, which is another thing that you can tween. And then we have this movement, which is basically this entire object getting smaller through a tween, and then suddenly the entire object getting larger through a tween. Pretty simple, right? And then, bam, we suddenly swap it to this object here, which is down. And then there's another tween that's added with that object getting small, and then suddenly getting a little bit bigger. So that way we have basically this motion here. And then we have all the stuff being animated, but then there's another tween right here, which is this movement right here. So it's another camera movement. And we have two different tweens going on. We have this stick man, basically tweening, where all he's doing is just getting smaller. And then suddenly he flips to a whole different shape. Like, we didn't actually have to animate that desk changing in perspective. We just cheated and we just flipped it at the end of the movement. Because the audience isn't going to be able to tell that we didn't animate it. And then the background itself, if I come up here and I turn off our frame, that's the background. And all the background is doing is rotating while also getting smaller and color changing from blue to yellow. And all three of those together, if we come back in, give off the feeling that we're actually moving across this environment. And then we just pop this guy in here all of a sudden. He's not even animated in. He just appears out of nowhere. And then same thing. We have more classic tweens, where now all of these guys are just getting smaller. And we also have a tween of the background going from yellow to red. And then this red guy just pops in here out of nowhere. And then they continue their animation. And then we finally have 4 final tweens, which is all 3 of them and the background, all getting smaller. And then bam, we just plop back into this environment here, which is down here, which gets smaller and then suddenly bigger and then smaller again for a settling motion for this, which gives you that feel that we are traveling out of the front doors of the school. All right, and then what we have is we have this rainbow. But the way that we animated this rainbow is we have a rainbow shape, which is not animated at all. All it does is it goes down for the camera movement to basically move above it. But the actual reveal of that rainbow is actually a mask. And we're animating the mask covering it. And as we know from our previous tutorials, whenever you have a mask that a shape that is on a mask layer that is covering something, that's actually revealing it instead. So if I were to lock these layers, That's what's happening. We are revealing the rainbow. So now that you guys have a better idea about how we use classic tweens to have all those camera movements happen, and keep in mind that all of those classic tweens are ridiculously easy to do. You can do all of those camera movements in like 10 minutes. It's pretty simple. It's pretty easy. Let's take a look again at that final video, and hopefully this time you'll have a better understanding of exactly how all of those camera movements were done with something as simple as just classic tweens. So any questions about that particular example for tweening?
Not really.
All right, sweet. Let's look at some other examples. So that was an easy one. That was a simple one. Let's look at something that's a little bit more complex. So let's look at something from TrueTale. In fact, from TrueTale Prime. So we've got a SWF here of Canicus, basically the camera rotating around him as it pulls away from him, and then he shoots off this giant fireball here. Alright, so how did we achieve this camera movement with tweens? Let's take a look. And it always opens it up in Adobe Animate. I'll just stay in Adobe Animate for this one. Alrighty. So let's go ahead and jump inside of this symbol, where we've got all this happening. So the way that we did this is, number one, we took our actual character, and there's a tween on the character of him just getting smaller. See that? But all of his animation is still happening inside of this symbol. So if I double click to go inside of his symbol, all of his animation is inside of here, and he doesn't actually get smaller or bigger inside of here. You never want to shrink a character or enlarge a character inside of their actual file itself, or inside of their symbol itself. Leave that to all of the animation for all of their various body parts. If you want to shrink a character or enlarge a character, or like camera move a character, you should always do it to the actual symbol of the character outside. So we just have a classic tween of him getting smaller. And then all of these keyframes right here used to be a tween, where we just basically moved him over here and up. And then we moved him... Oh, that was it. So it was just him moving over here and then up. And then we converted them to keyframes after the fact. I don't know why. We did this 4 years ago. So that's one example of classic tweening. Now if we turn this off and we go find that background. So when you combine his movement with the movement of the background, it sells that notion, that trickery, that we're trying to rotate around this character. And that's achieved with the background moving as well. So let's double click inside of this background here. And let's take a look at this background and what the tweens are for this. Here we are. So the background itself is split up into 4 different layers. And if I zoom out here, we've got the background layer, which is just this entire object here. We've got the stairs. We've got the fountain. And we've got the foreground wall. And all of those have their own classic tween, where it looks like they're moving and translating from left to right, but they're actually not. They're actually being rotated. All of these are actually being rotated. And the rotation is just all the frickin' way up here. So you see how they're rotating around that point all the way up there? So because they're rotating around this point all the way up here, when we actually zoom in, it feels like we're kind of twisting the camera and tilting the camera to actually turn it. And when combined with everything else, it creates that illusion of moving the camera. And all of that is handled just using classic tweens. So let's take a look at a more advanced example. Probably the most advanced camera movement we've ever done in Flash for this show. And that's this one right here. This is also from Truetail Prime. And we have a camera movement where we dive in to Dolee, we spin around her, and come back out. So how was that handled using just classic tweens? Let's take a look. All right. So here's the Flash file. Let's go ahead and go inside of our master clip and enter the scene. And first off, just like we did with the other one, let's take a look at the characters first. So the characters have a whole bunch of classic tweens on them to basically have them getting larger while also tilting and slowing down, and then getting smaller to make it seem like we're moving away from them. But inside of each one of these characters, their animation is not actually getting larger or smaller. See that? Where she actually bends over. Her entire bottom part isn't even fully animated because it's off, it's out of camera, it's off frame. So once again, it's just another example of how if you want to actually do a camera movement on a character, don't do it inside of the file, of the symbol itself. Do it to the outside of the symbol and have all that camera movement stuff happening in here. Hell, Victor gets pretty freaky in here. If we take a look at Victor's symbol, here's what his animation does. We didn't even bother fully animating his face because it was off screen. That's a nice image right there. But because he's off screen, during those moments, there's no point in animating any of it. See that? Alright, so now that we had classic tweens on the characters, how does adding a background make that feel more believable? Let's go ahead and dive into this background. So this camera movement is split up into 4 layers. We've got a BG layer, which is this entire giant background right here, which is all just one big image. And hey, look at that! This is the room where we actually have that stained glass window from our vectoring tutorial. If any of you were curious about where that was being used in our old Truetail Prime. Then on top of that, we've got the behind slop, which is just a very quick shape that was just filling something in and it has no animation on it. Then we have the mid stare, which is just this stare right here. And then we have all these front stares. And when you combine all of those together, it creates that sort of illusion of moving forward. So the background itself is a very simple one. All we're doing is we're just rotating that and then having it tween from a normal 100% saturation to a 0 brightness to a negative 100 brightness. So it's going from normal to black to fade. So that's pretty simple. There's nothing hard about that. The mid stare on top of it is basically having the same camera movement, but at the same time, it's also being stretched out. Notice how it's rotating, but it's also being stretched at the same time. That stretch kind of gives that illusion of, oh, okay, we're kind of starting to approach these stairs back here. And then it's these foreground ones that are just being rotated right now, but there's actually animation happening inside of here. With all of these classic tweens here, for every single one of the steps, And that step is basically being stretched out while simultaneously translated from point A to point B. Same with this one. Stretched out, being translated from point A to point B. All of them are being stretched out and going from point A to point B, just at different intervals from each other. And then behind them, we've got the floor, which is just these lines. Every single one of these lines is a different classic tween. See that? The two lines together. And all those lines are doing is they're just basically getting larger, which gives off the illusion that they're actually coming towards us. And when you combine those with the stairs, it creates the illusion that we're actually moving forward towards those stairs. So when you combine all of that together with all those various classic tweens all being played at the same time, you get that illusion that we are actually moving forward towards these characters. Even though we didn't actually have to animate any of that. All of that was animated by Flash using classic tweens. Pretty cool. Classic tweens can be very powerful if you know how to utilize them effectively. So, something as simple as this can become as complicated as that. Any questions about classic tweens before we move on?
I don't think so. No.
The rest of you?
No, I'm good.
All right, excellent. Let's go ahead. Let's talk about motion tweens. Yay, motion tweens! So motion tweens they're like when Macromedia created Flash, Macromedia Flash back in like 1993. Motion tweens didn't exist. They only had classic tweens and shape tweens. When Adobe purchased Flash from Macromedia and made it Adobe Flash, Adobe had another animation program at the time called Adobe After Effects. And Adobe, to kind of make Flash more marketable to their existing audience, decided that they would try to find a way to put an After Effects style of animating into Flash to kind of make it more familiar. And that basically took the form of motion tweens. So motion tweens do the exact same thing that classic tweens do. They just do it in a different way. So this is a symbol. Let's go ahead and double click to go inside of this symbol and we'll enter this work area. And same dealio, we'll make it just 1 second long. And let's go ahead and take that neon circle, which is already selected. Here it is. And we'll plop this back out here. So let's do the same stuff. So I've got my circle. I've got it on its own layer. But unlike with classic tweens, I'm not going to create an ending keyframe. I'm not going to do anything. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to right-click it and go Create Motion Tween. And now my entire layer has been turned into a lighter shade of blue. And without having to do anything, all I have to do is just go to any one area around here, move it, and see how it automatically created a little tiny diamond on there? Now, for those of you that use Adobe After Effects, you'll recognize that diamond. That's the After Effects symbol for keyframe. And basically, I am creating animation just like in After Effects. And After Effects usually works the same way. Once you've created those keyframes, you can just start moving things around and it will automatically create keyframes for you. Now, the cool thing is that I can actually tweak these lines. Maybe I want to come over here and I want to get rid of this keyframe. So I can like right-click this and go to Motion Path. No, hang on. Insert keyframe. No, clear keyframe. There we are. Clear keyframe all. There. Oh no, it cleared all of them though. I don't use motion tweens that often. What? Why did it do it for all of them? Oh wait, hang on. Do I just not have to? Hang on. Clear keyframe. Yeah. Position? Yeah, it still cleared all of them though. Motion tweens. This is just one of the problems you run into with motion tweens. I don't know, Phil, have you ever used motion tweens before? Phil? Are you even there? Probably not.
I'm sorry, what?
Have you ever used motion tweens before?
Yes, but I try to stay away from them.
Yeah, I try to stay away from them too. I I know that you can arc them like this, which is really nice, but I know that if you want to mess with easing, like notice how when I select this, it doesn't really show me the easing over here like classic tweens do. You have to actually double click it. Oh, well normally you have to double click it. What the heck? Alright, if I right click it and I go to motion path. No? Alright, hang on a second here, guys. Give me a moment. I just want to know if... Am I just being stupid right now? So I've created a keyframe. Double click. Yeah. See, if I double click it in Adobe Animate, it actually opens up the easing window, which you'll recognize this from Adobe After Effects if you've ever used Adobe After Effects before, which is freaking insane. Like, it's crazy what Adobe tried to do here. They tried to bring all of that After Effects technology into Adobe Flash, and it just doesn't look good, and it doesn't work, and it's insanely confusing. I don't like using them. They can still be useful if you want to just like very quickly create something going along an arc. But if you're wanting to put easing on here, it can get really annoying. It can get very, very annoying to try and get it to work properly. And even then trying to edit it after the fact as well, because it just does not use Flash to do this. It's using After Effects sort of technology that's just copied and pasted into the coding of Flash. So my advice is don't ever use motion tweens. I've had a lot of people, though, that I've spoken with over the years that love using the motion tweets. You just have to probably watch a couple tutorials on them and figure out how to use them effectively. But for this studio, for Skynamic Studios, don't ever use them. Because if we ever have to hand your Flash file off to another animator down the line who doesn't know how to use them, then that's going to cause a lot of bottlenecks in the pipeline, and we want to avoid that. But I do want to let you guys know that motion tweens do exist. They do the same things as classic tweens, they just do them in a completely different way. And you can always look up some tutorials on your own time to kind of figure out how to utilize those effectively if you want to do it in your own personal work. Otherwise, though, we stick to classic tweens. So with that said, let's jump into the beast, the behemoth in the room, the shape tween. Now, so far, everything we've done so far has just been moving static objects, otherwise known as symbols. We can shrink them, we can enlarge them, we can rotate them, we can change their color, we can fade them, but we're not actually changing the shape itself. We're just changing the image itself, the symbol itself. But there is a way to tween an actual shape deformation, a distortion, if you will, and that's called a shape tween. So let's jump into this symbol and enter another timeline, and once again, I'll just set this to 1 second. And let's go ahead and grab our handy-dandy circle again, but this time I'm not going to make it a symbol. I'm actually going to keep it as a fill, a wet art. So this is wet art. I can actually select this and mess with it. Now let's say that I want this to do the same thing as classic tweens. Like maybe I want this to transform over here. I've got my two poses. I'll right click and I'll go shape tween. And it's actually animating that shape itself moving over there. But I can also deform it, and it'll animate the deformation as well. See that? So a shape tween, in a broad definition, simply allows you to animate points moving to other points. So it's all about Flash actually one by one moving every single point one by one to a new location, which allows it to change the shape. For example, I can take this and I can grab my rectangle tool and I can create a rectangle. And now it's actually going to change that circle going into that rectangle by moving all of those points one by one. However, there is a limitation to this. If you create something that has a lot of points, more points than the original object, drastically more points than the original object. It did it, how do you... man, this never freaks out when I want it to freak out. Hang on, let's do this. Instead of that, let's actually grab my brush tool. And let's thicken that out. And let's actually go, all right, I'm going to sign my name. Whee! Now I want Flash to actually animate going from a circle to signing my name. And that's what happens. It really starts to freak out. Because Flash is trying to animate 8 points, transforming into an object that has, like, 250. If I were to select this and maybe optimize it, modify, shape, optimize, put that to a strength of 100, hit OK. Alright, so instead of it having 2,663 points, it has 68. But 68 is still phenomenally more than 8. So it still does the exact same thing. So the shape tween is limited. You want to try and transform it from one object to another object, but have the points be fairly similar in number. Otherwise, the shape tween won't work correctly. So let's look at a couple other examples of shape tweening. One way that you can sort of tweak shape tweening to help you out, and let's do this. Let's go back to this. Let's remove this tween. Now let's put another object on here. Let's put a square, right? And let's come over here, and let's move this square over here, and at the same time, let's create a couple extra points to like form a star. So we're going from there to there, there to there. Right click, create shape tween. So it's creating it, but maybe it's not doing it exactly the way I wanted it to. Like maybe I actually wanted this point to actually come down to this point. And likewise, I wanted this point to actually move over to form that point. So how do I control where the points are going? Well, the way that you do that is by using shape hints. Now, as long as you have a shape tween on a layer and you're highlighted over one of their keyframes, you can then come up to modify, shape, add shape hint, or hit Control-Shift-H. And I'll hit it, and here's what happened. This little A appeared, this red A. And what I can do is I can move that A to one of my points. Maybe I'll move it to this one right here, and see how it snaps? And then if I come all the way over to here, the A's over here as well, on the other keyframe. I'll move that over to here. And see how it turned green? This means that Flash thinks it knows what you're saying. So I'm going from point A to point A, which means it did it. It kind of freaked out in the process, but it is moving that point from A to A. And I can hit Control-Shift-H again, put a B right here, Control-Shift-H again, put a C right here, Control-Shift-H again, and put a D right here. And then, likewise, put that D up here, put that C over here, and put that B over here. And now, well, it's doing it, but it's not rotating at the same time like I wanted. So shape tweens are finagly. Shape tweens don't always do what you want them to do, which can get kind of annoying. So the way that I would go about this is I would do this. I would grab my pen tool, I would add an anchor point, and I'd basically create points here in the middle on this shape to match the points that I'm creating over there. So now I've got an 8-pointed rectangle, just like how I have an 8-pointed starry thingamajiggy. So let's try that again. Maybe I'll hit Control-Shift-H again, and what I'll do is I'll actually take B, and I'll put B right there. I'll take C, put C right there. D will go right there on that point. E will come right here. Control-Shift-H. F, Control-Shift-H. G, H. So now I've got them all where they need to go. Then I'll come back over here and do the same thing. A, B, C, D, H, G, F, E. And there it goes. It did what I wanted it to. All the points are moving where they need to go, and it's rotating at the same time. So it's all about using those shape hints to basically guide Flash towards creating the animation that you were wanting to create in the first place. Now, these can also have eases on them. So I can give this a negative 100, where it starts slow and then gets fast. Or I can give it a positive 100, where it starts fast and gets slow. But you'll notice that there's no pencil over here. I can't give it an ease in and an ease out at the same time. I'm limited. So it's got to be one or the other. Now, one way I can go about cheating that is I can put a keyframe right in the middle. But then I'd have to redo all of those shape hints again, which I'm not going to do. So let's do this then. Let me create a new shape here real quick. And I'll go to modify, shape, remove all hints. I gotta do it from the first one. There it goes. So I'm taking this rectangle and I'm moving it over here. And I'm also, like, really, like, deforming it. Let's grab that point and move that in. There. So if I want to have an ease in and an ease out on this, I have to put a keyframe in the middle of the actual tween. And then on this side, I give it a negative 100. And on that side, I give it a positive 100. That way I have a slow in and a slow out. So, you learned a little bit about shape tweens today, but let's talk about the practical applications of shape tweening. When should you ever use shape tweening? Well, for character animation, never. You'll never use shape tweening for character animation, period. I've never run into a situation in the 7+ years I've used this program where I've had to use shape tweening on character animation. I've never had to. Usually if I have to create a new shape, I'm an animator. I'll just draw it and I'll animate it. I won't actually use Flash to animate it for me. But for special effects animation, shape tweening can really help you out. Let's take a look at an example. So we have an example of a special effects thing right here, which is once again from True Tale Prime, where we've got this really cool waterfall in this sort of Wind Waker style, and it's pouring through these 3 openings in this aqueduct here. So this animation was almost completely animated using nothing but shape tweens and a little bit of classic tween here and there. But as far as like actually drawing all of these, none of it was drawn. This is all done with tweening. So let's take a look at this Flash file and get a feel for it. So let's take a look here. So this is all inside of a master symbol. Let's go inside. Here's all that animation happening. So this entire animation is separated into several layers. You know, we've got the sheer mist layer, which is these white things right here. So let's double click to go inside. And we've got even more layers of just this stuff moving down. But even that stuff moving down is still separated into this gigantic shape here, and then these thinner shapes, which are all locked. So let's unlock them. These thinner shapes here. So let's look at the big thick shape first. So all this is a classic tween of this shape getting larger, and then it's actually set to an arc guide, a classic motion guide, which we're going to talk about here later on in this tutorial. But it's basically a way of taking a tween and forcing it to follow a path. So that's all that's doing. So that's a classic tween. But let's actually double click to go inside of... hang on. Let's lock that. There we go. So here we go. Here's another thing, and this is a shape tween right here. So that's the shape right here, where if I put this on repeat, you'll see that actually moving down. This foam. And all this foam is, to make it seem like it's moving down, is these points to there. See how it's almost the exact same image? All they did was just move the points up a little bit on each one of these. So here we are with the points actually lined up with these lines. Then here we are again with them actually moving slightly up above the lines. And then what happened is there are shape hints on all of these to go from E down to E, and to go from D down to D. Basically, we're telling Flash that we want you to take these points and move them down to the next points. And because we did that, Flash actually animates them traveling down, which gives off that false impression that it's flowing downwards constantly. Now, we could have also traditionally animated that, but to traditionally animate that would have taken, like about an hour. But this particular animator was able to get this entire thing done in about 4 minutes, just because they were able to use shape tweens effectively. Let's jump back out. So what else in here used shape tweens? Well, we've got these misty shapes right here. So if we go inside, it's basically these shapes moving down. So let's go inside of each one. Each one is a separate object. We go inside, and this is actually a classic tween. We've got a classic tween of basically this symbol fading in from a 0% alpha and then traveling down. But inside of that symbol is another shape tween of basically this gigantic rectangle shape tweening into this more pointed smiley face kind of curved shape here. So basically we have a shape tween of a rectangle traveling to a curve. That's just a shape tween. And then outside, we animate that with classic tween moving down and fading in. And then we basically layer 5 of them all happening in a row to give off that feeling that a waterfall is going down. And then we combine that with all the other stuff that we've done to create that illusion of a waterfall flowing down. Now, this could have been traditionally animated and it would have looked amazing, but this particular animator was able to finish this entire thing in about 45 minutes. Rather than if this was actually a traditionally animated waterfall, it could have taken much, much longer to get that actually traditionally animated and then vectored and cleaned and colored and looking beautiful. So this is just another way that you can animate, I guess, on a budget to create that sort of Wind Waker-y, flowy, watery feeling. Just one example of how you can utilize both shape and classic tweens for special effects. So, with that said, for those of you that would like to watch a quick video real quick, we've got an advanced shape tweening tutorial that was actually created by our old special effects animator, Patrick Rantala, who animated most of the effects that I showed just even during this tutorial. And I'm going to play this real fast, and if you want to be able to listen to it, you're going to have to jump into the live stream recording real quick. So I'll give you guys a brief couple of seconds to do that, and then I'm going to start playing this video. Of course, if I had it over here. All right. So here we go. It's only about 6 minutes long.
When I say tween, everyone instantly knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, let's just... Okay. If I say flash tween, everyone knows what I'm talking about. The motion tween. It's what separates us from those knuckle-dragging, archaic Disney animators. This is the story of the unloved, useless, less attractive green sibling. Welcome to advanced shape tweens, bending Flash around your iron will to finally make them useful. As I'm sure you're aware, Flash is a vector-based program, meaning that what you see are a raster representation of a collection of points connected with lines and curves. Motion tweens move, rotate, and scale these points and lines while maintaining their positions relative to each other. It doesn't matter what you do, a square will always have 2 parallel sides and 4 corners. When you create a shape tween, on the other hand, Flash compares the start and end shapes and moves all the points in a straight line from one to the other. It is possible to create a shape that is between the start and end by moving the points and handles part of the way and then drawing the new shape. That is, if the start and end shapes have the same number of points. If the points don't easily match up, Flash gets inventive with making new ones. Pro tip: don't let Flash get inventive. Extra points can be hidden in straight lines or curves to prevent Flash from making up its own. At this point, you should note to only use the white arrow sub-selection tool. The black arrow selection tool creates points without notifying you, and point control is critical. An extra point can be placed very close to another point to give the impression of a single point splitting in two. You almost always want to go out of your way to make sure that the start and end shapes are as similar as you can make them, by adding or removing some extra points. You can use the Optimize Shape tool, set to 0 to quickly count the number of points and curves in a shape. Vector-based programs, as we know them, define points of a shape in a specific order and then fill the space they make. Starting from the upper leftmost point and going around clockwise, point to point drawing the shape. Imagine an ant crawling around the edge of the shape, clockwise. The first point in the upper leftmost of the shape is the 0th point. Why call the first point the 0th point? Because computer scientists Flash compares the start and end shapes starting with the 0th point. So if the start and end shapes have the same or a very similar 0th point, Flash is more likely to match the whole tween correctly. So it's a good idea to face complexity to the right and down to make the 0th point as clear as possible. The most common mistake is changing the 0th point between shapes, or 0th point ambiguity. Putting the shape tween inside a graphic and animating it mirrored or upside down, and then flipping the symbol can solve all kinds of problems nothing else can fix. There are a few things that are explicitly impossible for Flash to do with shape tweens. Namely, splitting a shape and creating a hole in a shape. These actions change the winding number of the shape. If you want an ant to crawl over every edge of the shape, disconnected edges need additional ants. So, if the number of disconnected edges change, Flash duplicates an existing edge, and that's where you get this black eye effect. The best way to put a hole or split a shape is hiding small holes or hairlines between shapes, so the winding number doesn't change during the tween. Another workaround is coloring the two end shapes differently. Flash can't merge shapes of a different color. Sometimes, no matter what you do, Flash will just be too dumb to understand what you want. This is where you'll probably need to resort to shape hints. We use shape hints to tell Flash, I want this point to move here. I'm sure the developers thought these would be rarely used, somewhat obscure part of Flash, just judging from how needlessly frustrating and difficult to use they are. On the first frame of the tween, go to Modify Shape, Add Shape Hint, or press Ctrl-Shift-H. Move the hint to the point that is causing you trouble at the start and end of the tween. It'll turn green when Flash thinks it understands. Shape hints encourage Flash to reanalyze the tween differently. If the tween still isn't working, repeat for other trouble points, working clockwise around the shape until it works or you reach Flash's arbitrary maximum of 26 hints. Shape hints are most effective when they snap directly to a point. Unfortunately, Flash won't snap hints to a smooth curve even if there's a point on it. So if you hold down Alt and break the handles just a little bit, you can create a point for the hint to grab onto, but not sharp enough to be seen. To remove a hint, drag it off screen, or right-click Remove Hint. I hope this presentation will help you better understand how to use shape tweens and the principles behind their operation. Shape tweens are a powerful part of Flash that don't get used enough. Just remember the 3 things to keep in mind for a successful shape tween. Point control. Every point at the start needs a point at the end. 0th point. The leftmost point should change the least. Shape hints. Only use them if you need them, but you'll probably need them a lot. The end.
And there you have it. That's just some words of wisdom from our old Flash special effects animator, Patrick Rantala. So, before we go any further, do you guys have any questions about shape tweens?
Nope.
Not necessarily. I might just go over a little bit with you because, let's see, I understand the Toon Boom side that's kind of similar to this, where you just can edit simple points and you can just reuse one drawing and create an effect with that. With Flash, though, just setting up the points, I don't know. I'll just go over it with you.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
A little bit too. Yeah,
that's perfectly fine. We'll go over it a little bit later outside of this tutorial.
Yeah.
But all right, with that said, let's go ahead and dive into something more fun. So far everything we've shown with regards to animation has all been just tweens, and tweens. But it's so rare that you're ever even using tweens for character animation. Let's start talking about the kinds of animation that we expect you guys to have for characters. And that is symbol animation, keyframed animation, traditional animation. So these are the 4 different ways that you can go about messing around with symbols. So let's talk about this. So let's dive inside of here. This is a whole symbol by itself. Now, for those of you that have taken our animation test, this is going to look very, very familiar to you. It's basically the exact same thing. We require every single potential animator who wants to be a character animator here at Skydynamic. They're required to take this test. So let's take a look here. Let's start off with keyframing, moving and rotating. So I'm going to unlock that layer, which is keyframe, move, and rotate. It's just got a symbol here with this happy smiley. Whee! And all I'm going to do is using keyframes, I'm going to move him from point A to point B, and I'll rotate him at the same time. So I'll put a keyframe down here at start. I'll put a keyframe down here at stop and move him all the way up here, while also rotating him. Basically, that's my start and that's my end. Okay. Now, what I like to do is, even if I'm animating in Flash, I always try to adhere to those 12 principles of animation. So before he starts his movement, I'm probably going to go ahead and have him anticipate the movement by moving down beforehand. Then he'll start to move up. And this would be the kind of thing where I could turn on my onion skinning. And I could have the onion skin cover the entire area to basically always kind of see what's going on here. Bum, bum. And then I'll put another one right here, and maybe he'll start to go a little bit faster. And see how I'm spreading him out a little bit farther. I could also draw lines on here to kind of time everything out. And then I'll go F6. Move him kind of all the way up into the middle here. And let's go backwards. Let's do this. Alt drag over to here, and I'm actually going to move him up in the opposite direction because he's going to settle into that pose. And then I'll alt drag down, and he's going to move back down a little bit. Alt drag down. He'll move down even more. And then let's go F6 right here as well. And have him kind of hit the middle of this. And then to make that a little bit smoother, what I might do is hold on this anticipatory movement. Move these keyframes up to where it's all on 2s. Just like that. And then I would grab all of this and do the same thing for the settle. Put the settle on 3s. That way he goes in, goes up, and settles in. And to get all the rotation done, I've got my middle point here. So I turn this back on. Maybe right here, he's actually rotated completely sideways. Right here, I'll rotate him completely sideways, but then I'll kind of move him a little bit back in. Same thing. Get him to match up with the 1, and then move him back in a little bit more. And what I might do, actually, is I might make it to where when he gets to the middle of this, That's actually when the fastest, most drastic amount of rotation happens. Something more like that. We can hide a lot in the fact that it's moving quickly. So something kind of like this. And then maybe when he anticipates his movement, he might actually move in the opposite direction. And then same dealio. Right here. The most drastic amount happens. So it goes to about there. Then right here. Kind of rotate him a little bit more. If I can see that. I'm having trouble seeing the one before it, so I'm going to drag this out to where I just see... There it is. I can see it now. It's kind of... And let's get rid of the stuff that's happening after it. That way I can just see the one that's before it. Yeah. So it needs to rotate a little bit more. And then, same dealio. I'm actually going to go in the opposite direction. Kind of like that. That way, by keyframing, I was able to have this play. Of course, it's not playing at the full 24 frames per second for some stupid reason. Don't know why. Well, that's kind of sucky. Hang on a second here. Is it because I'm using CS6? Let's very quickly save this to my desktop. I'll save this out as version 4. And let me open this up in Adobe Animate here real quick. And let's play that again. Well, there it goes. It's playing at 24 frames per second now. I think I'll continue the tutorial from in here, because it's still the exact same stuff that I'm going to be going over. It's just a different color scheme. But there you go. Through using keyframing and just moving and rotating, I was able to create an animation. Let's do the exact same thing, but instead of moving and rotating, I'm going to be squashing and stretching. So I'm going to create a keyframe, and I'm also going to create a keyframe at the end because I want him to end in the exact same spot. And I basically just want him to stretch up and then stretch back down. So I'm going to go F6, and I want to anticipate that motion. So I'm going to stretch him out. Or squash him in, sorry. F6, squash him in even further, but also stretch him out at the same time because he has to maintain mass. And then maybe I'll go one more where he just goes in ever so subtly. Just a little bit. Just like that. And just squashes out just a little bit as well. Very subtle. So I really anticipate that motion. And then I'm going to have him, bam! Skyrocket all the way up to here. And also squash in at the same time. Because once again, when you're stretching something, that mass is going to stretch out as well. Bam! And then what I'll do is I'll hold to the apex and have him actually kind of go up a little bit more. Maybe he'll squash in ever so slightly. And then he's going to start coming back down and stretching back out as a result. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back to this original shape. And this is how I handle settling whenever I'm doing settling for animation. I always go to the end shape that I want the settling to stop at, and I work my way backwards. So I'll take that, and I'll have it go past. And I'll take it again and have it go above. And then I'll take it again and I'll have it go back. But this time it'll just go a little bit. And there we go. That way I create
get into a habit I used to have.
So if we see that play, we get a nice squashy, stretchy. All right, so we've got keyframing, move, and rotate. We've got squash and stretch. Let's talk about classic tweening. So, like I said, classic tweening can still be used for character animation. It's just insanely rare that you'll ever do it. So let's do the exact same thing that we did with keyframe, move, and rotate, but do it with a classic tween instead. So F6, F6, move this up, rotate it around, right-click, classic tween. Now I'm going to select that, go to my easing, click on the little edit ease option, and give it an ease in and an ease out. Then what I'll do is I'll select the entire thing, right click, convert to keyframes. While I've got it selected, right click, remove classic tween. That way it's just a series of keyframes. And then using control, holding down control, I will select every other keyframe and shift F6. That way I've got a traditionally animated looking tween, or not tween, a traditionally animated looking keyframe movement, but I created that movement using a tween. So it doesn't look like it was done with a tween in the end, because I was able to convert everything afterwards. So for all intents and purposes, this purple classic tween and this keyframe move and rotate are the exact same animation, but the classic tween actually allowed me to get a more appealing version of it rather than my very quick and dirty one over here. Alright, so normally we'd keep going over to single frame, but it's got an arrow pointing up here, and this has an arrow pointing down there, so maybe we should move up here to classic tween arc first. So classic tweening along an arc. This is the kind of thing where so far we've only done classic tweens that are moving along a straight line from point A to point B. How do we get it to actually move along a curve? Well, the way that we go about that is we first off, we start off just the way we do with every other classic tween. Hit F6, F6, I want him to move over here, and I actually want to do a head turn. So maybe I'll go modify, transform, and I'll flip him horizontal so he's doing a head turn. So point A to point B, point A to point B. Let's zoom in here. Okay, now before I create any kind of tween on here, I'm actually going to right-click the layer itself and go to Add Classic Motion Guide. Bam! And what it did is it took my original layer and it's nested it underneath a new layer called Guide, and then whatever the name of that layer was. And now anywhere on this empty layer, I'm just going to create a random line. Don't even care what it is. Then, coming back to this original keyframe, right here, I'll select this, make sure my Snap to Objects is turned on, and then I'll drag one end of the line up to it until it snaps into that registration point. Then I'll go to the other keyframe, select it, and do the exact same thing. Drag it over until it snaps. And now, I've got it snapped to the beginning and the ending of my symbol. I can now curve this line. And now, if I add a tween to this, it'll tween it along the line. But you see how it's actually flipping the shape because I transformed that horizontally? So that's not good. We don't want to do that, so let's go ahead and transform and flip that horizontally again. And there we go. It's actually traveling along that line. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, do my edit easing again to give it a custom ease for an ease in and an ease out. Because like I said earlier, it's very rare that you'll ever have a tween that does not have an ease in and an ease out on it. So there we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a keyframe right here in the middle. And then put a keyframe right next to it. And then on the keyframe that's right next to it, I'll transform, flip that horizontal. Same thing over here at the very end. Transform, flip horizontal. So now I've actually got two tweens. I've got a tween going from here to here. And then a tween going from here to here. And what does that look like? It gets me my head turn. That still has an ease in, ease out, and he just flips his head in the middle. Like, once again, when your character is making its fastest motion, that's when you can get away with cheating. That's when you can get away with actually not animating something. Because it's happening so quickly that the audience won't notice. Okay. Now, if I wanted to, I could take this entire thing, I could right-click it, I could convert it to keyframes. Then while it's selected, right-click it and remove that classic tween, which means I don't need this classic tween arc anymore because now these are all just keyframes. And same dealio. select every single other one, and Shift F6. And there you go. You get a head turn that looks more traditional, like it was actually done traditionally rather than with a tween. Alright, so what do we got so far? All these smileys are pretty happy, being all bouncy and silly. So we have an arrow that's pointing down over here into the classic tweening arcing with single frame, but it looks like we got to learn about single framing before we can go into that. So, single framing. Now, single framing is actually a special symbol that has been set up specifically for single framing. You'll notice that whenever we've jumped into symbols so far throughout all of these tutorials, it's always been another timeline inside of that symbol. Well, it's the same thing with single framing. If I double click to go inside of the smiley, you'll notice that we're in a brand new timeline now, but I've actually already got 4 keyframes that basically already have animation on it. That is basically this smiley who's looking towards the center and turning his head. So frame 1 is him all the way over here. Frame 4 is all the way him in the center. So we'll double click back out. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put down a keyframe. I'll set that to frame 2 over here in properties. And you notice how when I selected the symbol, it gave me the properties for the symbol, but down here under looping, the option is set to single frame. And as long as I change this number, it changes what frame number inside of this is actually appearing out here on this keyframe I put down on it. So what if I do this? F6, I'll set that to frame 2. Again, F6, set it to frame, oh, it already is on frame 3. Oh, sorry, this is supposed to be frame 2. That's frame 3. And then again, F6, and I'll set that to frame 4. And that way I've actually created animation. See that? Of him slowly turning his head. And that was all done outside of the symbol, because inside of the symbol I already had those assets created, and I can control when they appear by creating a keyframe, having the option under looping set to single frame, and changing the frame number. Now, one example of why this is an important skill to learn is how we animate all the facial assets for our puppets. If we actually open up one of our puppets real quick. Let's open up Caleb. So Caleb, well, actually all of his puppet parts, you'll notice that when I select it, the symbols are all set to single frame. Every single one of these are set to single frame. That's because all the different versions of these particular ligaments are inside, ready to be used by animators. Take a look at his hands. All of his hands are in here already, including all of these extra hands all the way here at the end. So if for whatever reason I wanted the hand on frame 108 to appear outside, I just have to put down a new keyframe, select this symbol, and set it to 108. And there you go. It appears out here, and now I can animate it by squashing and stretching it and moving it around. So that's the reason why we like to use single framing, and why you guys need to learn about single framing if you want to get into puppet animation, because most of your puppet animation, when they are changing their body parts around, from different hands to different ears to different eyebrows to eye blinks, all of that stuff is handled through symbols that are already set up for single framing. For example, his lip syncing. He has a symbol here, which is his mouth. Inside of that mouth is every single mouth he needs to use for lip syncing for a happy, a sad, and a neutral. And if we want all of those mouths to be appearing outside when he talks, it's all about putting down keyframes and selecting the actual frame number of the mouth we want to show. Same thing with his ears, with all the different ears he needs to use. Same thing with his eyebrows, with all the different eyebrows he has to use. Same thing with his eyelids, for all the eyelids he uses, for his blinks. And again, same thing with his cheeks, for all of the cheeks he uses for emoting.
And this is another thing that you'll find out in later animation with puppets. This is standard for how you animate regardless, but it is imperative when you do frame switching to make sure everything lines up correctly, because the things you're switching are symbols, so they're going to have different drawings in each one. So it depends on how long you expose each drawing for how many frames. Like if it's not, like for instance, if it's not set up correctly, like maybe a head will end up turning too early, or an animation will accidentally repeat because the exposure is too short, so the animation will end up looping within that symbol that you set up.
Yeah, well, the way we normally avoid that is we have a label layer up here that would be the length of the entire animation, and it's just copying and pasting that label layer into every single symbol that you have nested animation inside of. But we'll talk about that when we go over animation later. But I just want to show you guys that. So this smiley is basically a very simplistic version of that complicated puppet, where you have shapes inside. You are controlling when those shapes appear outside of the symbol by actually putting keyframes on the layer that has the symbol itself. So with that being said, let's see if we can combine these two techniques. What if we take classic tweening along an arc combined with single framing to make this head turn feel even more real? Actually try to push the bar of what we can do with 2.5D animation. So let's go ahead and grab this. Let's create a keyframe. I want to move him over here. I'm not going to flip him yet. I'm going to right click the layer, add classic motion guide, create a random line somewhere, doesn't matter. Go to my first keyframe, select, snap it to the registration point, go to my last keyframe, select, snap it to my registration point, curve the line. Now that I've got it curved, right click, create classic tween, select that tween, go to edit easing, that way we have a nice ease in, ease out. Select the entire thing, right click, convert to keyframes. Do I have the tween to keys in here? I do. There's an extension you can download, which we haven't gone over extensions yet, but it actually does the tween to keys all for you, which I'm going to do right now because I don't feel like doing that. There you go. See how it automatically did it? Took that entire tween and turned it into keys. I just cheated it. We'll talk about extensions during next week's tutorials. Now that's no longer a tween. I don't need this layer anymore, so I'm going to delete it. But now all of these are keyframes. And you'll notice that this symbol already has single frame. It's already set up for single framing. So what I'll do is as he gets to the middle... Oh, I forgot to flip him, didn't I? Damn. This is where I can use my edit multiple frames. And I think that if I select all of these all at once and I modify, transform, flip horizontal... no, it flips them all at the same time. That's alright. Just flip it horizontal. Modify, transform, flip it horizontal. Modify, transform, flip it horizontal. Just 3 more to go. Modify, transform, flip horizontal. Modify, transform, flip horizontal. And modify, transform, flip horizontal. There we go. So that way he flips his head halfway through the motion. So during those halfways, I'm going to take this and I'm going to put this to frame 4. And then as he gets away from it, I'll make it go to frame 3. And then frame 2. That way, as he gets closer to the middle, he actually starts turning his head towards the middle. And same thing over here. Now, if you're using Adobe Animate, you can actually use a window called the Frame Picker, which is somewhere in here. Where the hell is the Frame Picker? Huh. I have no idea. All I know is that I've got it over here. Normally it would appear over here in the window, and I don't know where it's at. That's very odd. Oh, there it is. It's right there. Okay, frame picker. All right, I just didn't see it. Frame picker. And you'll notice that whenever you select a symbol, it shows you all the frame numbers inside of that symbol. So Adobe specifically made this window to be used for single framing because of how often we Flash animators use single framing. So if I want to set this to frame 4, I'll just click on frame 4. If I want to set this one to frame 3, I'll just click on frame 3. And I want to set this one to frame 2, I'll just click on frame 2. And that way, it automatically did it for me. I didn't have to put in all those numbers, which makes it really annoying. And now what we've got is a 2.5D animation, where it actually has him turning in three-dimensional space, even though it is a 2D object. So if we come back over here, we take a look at our happy smileys. Everything's looking pretty good. We learned about keyframing with moving and rotating and squashing and stretching. We learned about classic tweening along a straight line, as well as classic tweening along an arc. We learned about using the single framing property of symbols that are already set up for single framing to bring out those hidden shapes inside of those symbols. And then we learned about how to combine classic tweening along an arc with single framing to create 2.5D animation. Last but not least, let's talk about nested animation. So this is actually tying into what Phil was talking about earlier with trying to make sure that your timelines are not like accidentally looping in on themselves and things like that. The way that you avoid that is with proper nested animation. So if we go inside of this symbol, get away from that, and we double click inside, you'll notice that I've got the exact same timeline outside, inside. See how it doesn't change? Even though it is a separate timeline, it is spaced out and timed out exactly as the timeline that it's outside of. That is the best way to avoid having accidental looping or symbols that aren't synced properly and things like that. As long as you have the exact same timeline that's happening outside be on the inside as well, and every single symbol that you're animating inside of has the exact same timeline inside of it, you will never have problems with your symbols looping in on themselves during the course of your animation. So I'm going to do a bunch of animation in here. Like, this is no longer a symbol. I'm actually inside of a symbol, and I can mess with the wet art. And I'm going to go ahead and animate him getting a tumor. So, anticipation. It's actually going to... Let's turn snapping off. It's actually going to go in a little bit. And I'll go F6 again. And it'll go in a little bit more for anticipation. F6 again. Now it's going to start going out. F6 is going to start slowing down a bit. F6, it slows down even more. And now it's going to start coming back in. So it starts coming back in for settling. Goes in a little bit more. Now it's going to go in the opposite direction, but not as much for that settle. And then one more of it coming back in, but very, very subtle. And that way, I've animated a tumor growing out of his head with anticipation and settling. And then I could add veins to this and actually make it look even more beautiful with that veiny tumor growing out of his head, but I'm not going to do that. We don't have time. But I've done animation inside of this nested symbol. But if I go outside and I click on the symbol itself, you'll notice that under looping, instead of it being set to single frame, it's actually set to play once from frame 1. And because it has the exact same timeline inside as outside, everything will sync up because I've only got one keyframe on frame 1. So all of this empty space is just all of that animation inside playing on the outside. So you can have symbols of animation within symbols of animation within symbols of animation. And as long as all of them have the same timelines and they're all synced up from frame 1, they'll all play in sync with one another. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Smiley demo. So does anyone have any questions about the 4 different ways of animating using symbols in Adobe Flash?
No.
I don't think so.
Okay, sweet. So I'm going to close this down, and we're going to go back over to Adobe Flash CS6. So the last thing we have to go over today is just working with sound inside of this program, because it can be very finicky due to some of the default settings that Flash CS6 has with regards to sound. So before we even think about bringing sound into this program, the very first thing we need to do is go to File, Publish Settings, and then change our audio stream and our audio event all the way up to its highest setting, which is 160. Now the reason why is because by default, whenever you start a new Flash file, which I'll start a new Flash file right now just to show you, the publish settings for that Flash file defaults to 16 kilobytes per second. Now that's a problem. We're animating at 24 frames per second. So if the sound is actually going slower than the animation, that means that over the course of this animation, our sound will slowly start to desync from the actual animation itself whenever we export this as a SWIF. And that sucks. For you Flash animators that have ran into that problem, this is what causes it. And once again, to fix it, go to File, Publish Settings, and change your audio stream and audio event from 16 kilobytes per second all the way to its highest setting. Not only will that fix your desyncing issue, but it will also make your audio just sound so much nicer within the program itself. So once you've changed that, we then get ready to import sound. So this is a whole new symbol. Let's double click to go inside of here real quick. And we are going to bring sound in here. Just like with everything else we've ever brought into Flash, you can always go to File, Import to Stage, but I just like dragging sound in here. And if you actually go into our tutorials folder for this tutorial, Public Assets, Tutorials, 04, Intro to Animation, you'll see that there's actually a sound file example right here ready for you guys just to toy around with. So I'm just going to drag that right in. And at first, nothing happens. It's like, wait, what? Where did it go? Where is it? Well, it went into the library. It didn't actually go onto the layer. So now I have to find that sound file in here, which is right there. Sound file example. And now, as long as I've got the layer unlocked, I can drag this down. And there it goes. It actually created a waveform. And to make that waveform a little bit easier to read, I can double click to go to my layer properties, and I can set the layer height to like 300%. There. Now I've got like a nice large sound file here. Now you guys aren't going to be able to hear this unless you're actually watching this recording or you're in the live stream. But if I hit play right now,
Split Paw, Land of Heroes.
It's Caleb saying, Split Paw, Land of Heroes.
Split Paw, Land of Heroes.
But now if I just want to hear Land of Heroes, I can go here and... Oh. Well, look at that. Nothing's happening. I can't hear anything. What? I can't scrub anything. How do I play this? Well, it seems to only play if I start all the way at the beginning and only play it from there.
Split Paw, Land of Heroes.
Which I'll tell you right now that if you're animating like a 10 to 15 second long scene inside of this program, having to start all the way back at the beginning for every single little word or syllable or phonetic sound that you want to do lip syncing for, it's going to drive you bonkers. It's going to make you want to kill yourself. The way to avoid that is to just select anywhere on this frame, and it's going to give you the properties for frame. And you'll notice that because there's sound on here, it's giving me the properties for sound. Change your sync from event to stream. And now I can play it from anywhere I want.
Land of Heroes. Land of Heroes. Heroes.
And I can also scrub it.
Land of Heroes.
which is amazing. This greatly enables me to be able to animate whatever I need to have happening to this piece of dialogue. It also works for music. It works for any sound file. If you're doing a music video inside of the program, having that sound file inside of here with, once again, the published settings set to 160 kilobytes per second for both audio stream and audio event, and the actual layer, the frame properties of the layer that has the sound with the sync set to stream. With those two things done, I can now work with sound inside of this program. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of our introduction to Flash animation tutorial. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about anything that was gone over today?
I don't think so. It's all good.
I don't think so.
All good.
All right, sweet. My
No,
advice is if you want to try to like take in some of this knowledge yourself, like after this tutorial is done, I would just open up our smiley demo animation, which is inside of this tutorials folder, and it's also inside of our tests folder, and just see if you can animate that smiley demo. Like, if you can animate the smiley demo, then basically everything I've talked about today has sunk in. So what are we going over next week? So next week, on both Saturday and Sunday, we are going to have the next 2 tutorials. Now, the very first tutorial, which will be 8 p.m. Saturday, is going to be puppet rigging, specifically for the body. We're going to go over character turnarounds and how character turnarounds can heavily influence on the quality of a puppet. We'll talk about some shortcuts. We'll talk about how to set up timelines for puppets, how to set up symbols for puppets, the difference between the registration and the transformation points, how to set up circle joints effectively, how to set up the layers for puppeting, how to mess around with outline colors, how to align body parts for puppets, and then just basically how to vector and build puppets from scratch. And it's going to be sort of a mix between a lecture and a demo. I'll be spending the first half of it lecturing you, and the last half of it actually building a puppet right in front of you guys and showing you how to do it. And then the following day, Sunday at 8 p.m., it'll be a continuation of this lecture that's going to go over how to do all the exact same stuff, but for all of the facial features in the head. And then by the end of those 2 tutorials, you should have a perfectly clear understanding of how to go about building puppets for Adobe Flash puppet animation. And that being said, that's all we've got. So we're done. Thank you so much for being here, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for the sound thing. Because I'm working on a little something right now. I can't say what. It is True Tale related, but I think you two will like it.
Well, excellent. Yeah, that sound thing, like, that threw me for a loop when I first started using Flash way back in the day, and I was like, why doesn't my sound work? And then I had my first day of class here at SCAD with Flash, and Professor Jancy, Michael Jancy, was just like, hey, by the way, guys, you should mess with your sound and fix this. I was like, why couldn't I have learned that years ago when I started?
Yeah, because with Toon Boom, it does that automatically.
It does, yeah.
And you can just turn off the streaming whenever you want.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know why
like,
Flash
there's
decided
literally
to...
a tab in the timeline that says sound, stream sound.
Exactly.
Like right there.
Like, once again, I don't know why Flash made that so freaking difficult with those default settings, but But alright, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and shut off the recording and put this thing up on the YouTube. So, thanks a lot, everyone.